Hey guys, wow, it has been, can you believe it, almost 2 months since I was last live on this channel. Welcome to all of you. Good to see you. It's also good to see my little doggy. He's had a shave recently. In this analysis, we're going to look at the Karen Reed case and try and sort of have a look at the case itself, but also try and figure out how you approach a brand new case. What sort of thinking do you use? And we're going to begin by just hearing what she says, what she has to say for herself, and kind of trying to get we'll be going through a couple of these little clips and getting a little bit of a feel for her and the merits of this case and the merits of her case. So that is in a way a very short summary of what is actually happening, is that we're dealing with one scenario where Karen Reed is guilty of something, and another scenario where someone else is guilty of something and there's some kind of conspiracy. Now, what I do want to share with you guys before we go too much further is that Karen has got a very expensive and powerful defense lawyer. His name's Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson has in the past represented the likes of Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey. As far as I know, he's also defended big name clients, including a Saudi prince and an NBA player. So it's kind of, in a way, this is kind of the big leagues, right? So let's just do a quick, I just want to quickly assess what's going on with you guys. How many of you guys know this case? How many of you guys don't know this case? So let's just kind of get a quick sense of that. Chelsea, good to see you. Pauline Buckles, good to see you. We aren't getting audio on the clips. Okay. Mel Stiller says, I know a little bit. Okay. Laura says, I know the case. Well, just to let you guys know, whenever I do a live stream, I tend to set everything up. Then I kind of undo everything. I sort of set everything off, and then I do it again. And that's because I've had previous experience where the sound doesn't pick up. And so I didn't do that this time, thinking it's just being paranoid. Well, obviously, that didn't really work. So let me go back and try and play that again. And let's see if we can, let's turn the sound off and turn it back on again. That's always how it's worked in the past. And then let me play that for you guys again. Sorry about that. She basically just says, I didn't do it. But anyway, let's listen to that. Okay, so could you guys hear that? Still no sound. Well, that is quite weird. It's strange. I can hear the sound. Let's try one more time. Share screen. Let's try share window. Share window instead of screen. Let's see if that works. Tell me if you can hear sound now. Did you hear that little piece? Definitely not. I know you can hear me, but can you hear the video? Still not. I really don't understand that. That's new. Share screen. Also share tab audio, entire screen. Okay, let's try one more time. Let's see if this works. Tell me if you can hear anything.
In a cover-up. You're alleging that law enforcement officials in this state committed murder and that they're covering it up. Why would they want to be involved in this?
Could you hear that? Good. Okay. So let's just go back to the part that I want to play.
John O'Keefe. I've never harmed a hair on John O'Keefe's head.
Her defense, bare-knuckled and bold, is making national headlines. Her lawyers alleging in court documents that a fellow police officer was involved in O'Keefe's death and colluded with other people in a cover-up.
So let's reiterate what I said earlier. This is a case or it's some kind of conspiracy involving someone else and a cover-up involving that someone else, right? And so we're going to try and figure this out and also figure out how to think about this case. I do hope you guys have got your TCRS notebooks. I've got mine, including a little bit of yellow legal pad paper. So I just want to do that poll again. How many of you know about this case? So in terms of the poll, the last time I looked, more than 60% seem to feel that you'd want to defend Karen Read. Let's have a look at where it is right now. Have you voted on the poll? If you haven't, please do vote. You're welcome to vote at the end of this analysis. But I would be interested to know if you do vote and you change your vote. Oh, wow. So those voting for the defense have gone down to 45%. At one point, it was actually 71%. So the prosecution are up to a third. The defense are around about just below half. And there's quite a lot of you, a quarter of you, who say you can't decide. Okay, Paddy Dunn says only what you've talked about. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you guys through the entire narrative. The good news is we can do that via a single article. And if you guys want to follow with me in this article, it's from Huffington Post. It's from September 5th. Sharon, good to see you here. And we're going to just kind of go through the facts of the case, and then I'm going to review it, just giving you what I think are some of the important sort of legal aspects to consider. Sasha says, I'm not familiar with the case. Well, you're about to be. Okay, so you guys ready to get going? If I have a little bit of a coughing fit, I'm kind of recovering from COVID. I've had a couple of colds. I really don't know how this live's going to go, but so far so good. Let's see, touch wood. Let's see how it goes. Right, yeah, so here we go. So the article is titled Conspiracies, Cover-Up Claims, Dog Bite Analysis, Swirling Case of Boston Cop Taillight Murder. And this is kind of what the case has been, how the case has been referred to, is the taillight murder. And I think that's quite a good description, in a sense, is, you know, how is this case idiosyncratic? Well, because of it kind of involves a taillight and someone kind of being allegedly bumped into the snow and left for dead, right? Okay, so let's get started. Just once again, if you want to follow this on your own laptops or your own time, there's the link for it. It's a really good synopsis. I've already read it. It really is worth going through. Okay, shall I make this text a little bit bigger? Okay. Karen Reed woke up in a panic when she realized her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, wasn't at home in the early hours of Saturday, January 29, 2022. And you can already stop the narrative there and say, hold on, she woke up, so she was sleeping. And that would be the first thing I would write in my notebook was she really sleeping? And if she was sleeping, sleeping from what time until what time? Because people who are asleep when crimes typically occur happen in quite a few cases. The John Benet Ramsey case, the Amanda Knox case, to some extent the Oscar Pistorius case, and so on. And so she wakes up, it's kind of innocent. She wakes up, where's my boyfriend? And then she goes to look for him. She made frantic calls and enlisted two women to help her retrace their steps to a house in Canton, Massachusetts, where the couple had been invited to join friends for drinks after leaving a local bar. Now, the other thing that's quite interesting is what's also parallel with the John Benet Ramsey case is she invites other people into effectively the crime scene, right? Like before she finds anything out, she contacts other people and says, help me, deal with this potential emergency. The important things to note here are that something happens in the early hours, that it's happening in the middle of winter in the sort of area of sort of Boston, Massachusetts, Canton, Massachusetts, and it involves drinking on a Friday night. And it involves a couple who drink on a Friday night only for the girlfriend, Karen, to wake up by herself. And I think that's already quite an interesting insight, is that without knowing anything about this case, you have a couple who go out for drinks, and the next morning, Karen is alone in bed and her partner is somewhere else. And that can already suggest, is her partner up to something? How does she feel about the fact that he went and had a part two to the night where she didn't, right? And then there's also alcohol within this whole scenario. Okay, it was around 6 a.m. when she spotted O'Keefe's snow-covered body in front of the home. She leapt screaming from her friend's car and tried desperately to warm him as she began performing CPR. Now, just to be clear, she literally pulled away his shirt and pulled away her own shirt and tried to warm his body with her own body, like trying to put her skin against his skin. One little problem I've got with this scenario is that his body is covered in snow, and yet she said she saw him immediately. And we will come back to why that doesn't quite make complete sense. Also, she spots O'Keefe's snow-covered body, not either of the friends that are with her. The other thing is she begins performing CPR, which if you're going to be on trial for murder, the fact that she's performing CPR seems to indicate that she cares about him, right? And so that's also something that is at least a mitigating factor. Right, so let's continue. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy would later report that O'Keefe, 46, by the way, Karen was about 41 years old, so about a 5-year age difference. had suffered multiple skull fractures that caused bleeding in the brain, and that hypothermia was a contributing factor in his death. Now, this is really important, and this is something you would want to make a note of. If you don't know anything about what happened here, well, the autopsy results are going to give you um, your first kind of best um, scientific explanation for the kinds of injuries. And I don't know if you are aware of this. There's some speculation that he was injured by a dog. There's the defense case is that he was beaten up by a guy that is like Mike Tyson. And I think there's a reason that name was brought up and that idea was brought up. But we're dealing with multiple skull fractures, right? But then it says that hypothermia was a contributing factor in his death. And so this is also what makes the case quite complicated. And let me turn this question over to you. What is the cause of death in this case, right? More specifically, what is the single thing, the injury that led to the O'Keefe's death, in your opinion? Stephanie says, was he bending down when he was hit, or had he hit his head when he fell? So Erica says skull fracture. Zircon says hypothermia. And it's on this question that quite a lot rests, because if you think about it, if he died of hypothermia, can you really say that she killed him? Didn't the cold kill him, right? And so anyway, we're going to come back to that particular point. But that kind of makes it a little bit more complicated. It's not just that she doesn't, if you, the prosecution, you can't make the case that she drives into him and that kills him. There's another factor that actually kills him. And so does she does she does she want him to be dead? Does she have the intent, the requisite motive to kill her boyfriend? And so you might want to pause on this question for a while and think about it and think, if I compare this murder, for example, to Caitlin Armstrong, with Caitlin Armstrong, she goes there, she has a gun, she shoots Mo Wilson twice in the face. I've seen those autopsy photos. And then she shoots her a third time in the chest. There's no question about intent in that case. And so what I want to make clear is there is a question about intent in this case, right? I'm going to reveal at the end of this analysis on what side I'm on, in terms of if I was a lawyer, which side I would go into. Before I go away from the intertextualities, consider the case of Alec Baldwin. Did Alec Baldwin have the intent to shoot Helena Hutchins? And if you say, no, he didn't, does that then mean he's innocent? I mean, she died of her injuries, right? So if you, I don't know if you're following what I'm getting at is this case bears a lot more in common legally with the merits of the Rust incident than it does with the Caitlin Armstrong case. Now, if you don't know either of those cases, I'm sorry, I can't really help you. But the difference is, in the one case, you've got direct intent, which is dolus directus. It means direct intent. And in the other case, you've got something that's not direct intent. But then the other question comes up, did she deliberately hit him with her car? Because that would then be direct intent. And then it's quite different to the Rust incident in that although Alec Baldwin may have pointed the gun towards Helena Hutchins, did he intend to hurt her? I don't think so. Whereas in this case, it's an open question. When she was driving her vehicle, if she struck him, right? It's an open question. If she struck him, there's a question around whether she did or she didn't. She said she didn't. She said that she actually struck another vehicle, blah, blah, blah. We'll get to that. But the issue can also be if she struck him deliberately, well, then that is direct intent. But then the question becomes, did she strike him directly to hurt him or to kill him or what, right? Does that make sense? So all of that is just pausing without even getting to know any of the facts after that on this question of intent, because that's a very important legal question. What was the motive? And more than the motive, did the person really act with a direct intention, right? And although you don't need to prove this in a court, if you say, you know what, I think so, or you know what, it looks like that, well, then that takes you automatically to the next level where you say, well, then what was the motive? And I can already say to you at this early point, I don't think you can even begin to speculate about a financial motive because it seems to me it seems to me that she was pretty well off. And she is pretty well off if she can afford the legal defense that she can afford. Okay, Timmy, I'm going to put you down. Okay, so Deborah Kaiser says I'm going to have to read this because this was her boyfriend. Scarlett says I don't think she intended to hit him. Now, I think we're going to go through this narrative, but what I think is important to think about is, let's say, Caitlin Armstrong shot Mo one time, and let's say it was through her throat, something like that. Then you might actually get a sense maybe she shot Mo in self-defense. She took her gun there, meant to confront her, but then Mo attacked her. And so what I'm trying to get at is one shot is less intentional than three shots. And so how do you apply that to this case? Well, one of the ways you could apply it is you say, how hard was John struck by whatever was you were struck by, right? Let me say that again. So it's almost like saying, were you shot once, twice, three times, five times? That's going to give you a sense of someone's intent. And so you can, in a way, translate that by saying, how hard was he struck in order to get these injuries? Also, was he slightly injured? Does he have one injury? Does he have several injuries? Well, we know he's got multiple skull fractures. And so it appears that whoever or whatever happened to him was done in a severe way. That he wasn't just brushed slightly by the vehicle and then that was the extent of his injuries. He seems to have pretty serious injuries, right? And so the pretty serious injuries here seem to suggest intent of some sort. Do you agree with that? In other words, let me put this in a kind of an absurd way. If Alec Baldwin had shot Helena Hutchins and then shot her again, that would be absolutely clear what is going on there, right? By the same token, if someone struck someone with a vehicle and then struck them again with a vehicle or drove over them with a vehicle, well, then that's going to tell you something totally different. You see what I'm getting at? And can you also see we've barely touched on this narrative, and look how slowly we're going through it because we're trying to test the various legal dimensions. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to just take you through the rest of the narrative, and then we'll come back and look at some of those legal things. What does Pauline say? So I think that's a little bit of an irresponsible thing to say, is that someone clubs him to death and then she drives over him. Well, when? Pauline, I don't know if you know the case very well, but according to her, she he gets out the vehicle, she watches him go to the door, and then nothing. So he needs to get to almost to the door, and so he seems to be safe according to her version of events. And I'll try and play you that audio when we get to it. But I think that's a little bit of an irresponsible comment to make, because that's not part of the story. The part about the clubbing could be inside the house, but we haven't really got there yet. So Sweet Swede said he was found on the lawn, not the driveway. Okay, anyway, let's continue. Reed was accused of hitting him while making a 3-point turn, then returning home to leave him to die in the snow. She was charged with second-degree murder, vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, and leaving the scene of a collision. And so it's quite a complicated thing that's going on here. It's not just, did you kill someone? It's vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated. So it's a little bit like driving while under the influence, and then also leaving the scene of a collision. And also what's quite interesting is hitting him while making a 3-point turn. So it seems like they're aware that this vehicle was making several turns. The vehicle didn't just turn and go away. It was kind of moving like this, which I think is quite interesting. The case also became known as the tailgate murder, a reference to the broken taillight of Reed's SUV. Now, this is really important, is if you on Karen's side and you say, I believe she's innocent, right? Then you say, well, is there any evidence that her vehicle was damaged? And the answer is her vehicle was damaged. And then you say, well, when was it damaged? Well, it was damaged that night. The taillight was damaged that night. Then you say, well, surely it was damaged by during this incident, right? And then you can argue that both ways. And that's why this case is so full of twists and turns, because some people will say, I can't imagine how a vehicle striking someone could damage the vehicle, right? Well, I would say if it strikes someone hard enough, it certainly would damage the vehicle. The other thing to note is that it's a broken tail light, not some other part of the vehicle that's damaged. And then the part that I find kind of irritating is, did they not find any glass or fragments or paint or something like that on the victim's body, on John O'Keefe's body? Because that would then make it kind of an open and shut case. They found like a small little piece, like a sliver, a little fragment of glass in his clothing. You would think, well, that's it then. It's quite clear what happened. Authorities said it was damaged when she struck O'Keefe, and that they had discovered pieces of plastic near where O'Keefe was found, consistent with those missing from the SUV. It's quite tough to go through this in a neutral way, because I keep feeling like I want to provide a bit of insight. But let me just say that if the vehicle struck O'Keefe, right, and then kind of struck him again or drove over him, then his body would move. And also if he was somewhat conscious and he moved himself, that could explain why the pieces of plastic weren't right by him but nearby. I just want to say that again. If the vehicle struck him and he was then ridden over by the vehicle, then his body may have turned over to some extent, and that may have changed to some extent where the debris landed, if that makes sense. Her attorneys claim that the ring footage from O'Keefe's house show Reed striking his car on her rear side as she backed out of the garage early Saturday morning to search for him. Now, I think some people would look at that and say, how can I put it? There you have it. That is why you've got the damage to a vehicle. It's because she struck his vehicle. And I would say that seems like a kind of a coincidence. I'm not saying that she didn't strike his vehicle, but of all nights in which to perhaps have kind of a broken tail light, it's on this night. And the interesting thing is she reverses into his vehicle and then drives away. She doesn't stop and check. I've got a vehicle that makes beeping noises when you come very close to something. And you kind of got to ask, did she hit his vehicle intentionally, right? And in other words, did she hit John O'Keefe much earlier that night and then later hit his vehicle as well? Is it one or the other or both? Because there's also an argument that she didn't actually hit his vehicle. It's not clear whether she actually hit it. That's why this case is so confounding, because at each new development, there are like three possible explanations, right? Kebe says you can see that it hit the camera. You can see that it hit on the camera. Okay. Krista says we can hear it. But my point is, even if whether she hit the vehicle or not, she came so close to it, your vehicle would be telling you, it would be going like that, right? And you would know that and certainly if you then go like that, you would know you've struck a vehicle. Wouldn't most people get out and check? And so what I'm very curious about is, if you, whatever your theory is about O'Keefe, yeah, you've got her hitting something on camera and she doesn't get out and check, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Let's do a quick poll. Do you think, if it was you, if you got into your car right now and you reversed and you either almost struck a vehicle or you did strike a vehicle, do you think you would, and it's maybe your own vehicle, that's the other vehicle, or it's in your neighborhood, do you think you would check? Do you think you would get out your vehicle and check? In other words, if you're reversing and before you meant to stop, the car stopped because you struck another vehicle, do you think you'd get out and have a look? So Chelsea says yes. English Rose says yes. Songbird says yes. Laura says that as well. Now it could be that she was genuinely in like an emergency mode and wanted to get to John as fast as possible. If that's the case, she could have also called 911 and said, I've got a really bad feeling about this. Could you guys check, right? So that, you could say that was what she was focused on. You could also say that's why she crashed into his vehicle, was because she was so frantic to get to him, right? But there could also be an innocent explanation that he went into the house and that's why he wasn't home, and didn't mean that he was dead. That because this is very, very early in the morning and you've just woken up, right? anyway, the question then the question then rests on, would a reasonable person back their vehicle into another vehicle and then just drive on, in a situation where there's no one else around, there's no one else driving, there's no one else in that sort of situation? Would a reasonable person um, do that? And I don't think she was drunk at that point. Uh, um, I don't know if she was drunk at that point, but I suppose you could factor that into your analysis. I think there is evidence of her being drunk. They tested her for alcohol, and then they kind of projected it back, and they said she may have been well over the legal limit. She said that's the other thing that's quite interesting is she said she had 4 drinks, and the cops said based on her blood alcohol analysis they thought she'd had 9, and there's quite a big difference between the two. And I think that's quite a simple thing to say, is the science correct or not? Are the police trying to frame her? Are the police saying something that's not true? Are they trying to exaggerate? Or is it sensible, reasonable analysis? And is she actually telling an inconsistent story? Another way to really be quite simple about it is to ask the barman and to try and figure out how many drinks did she order? Also, what was she drinking? Well, she was drinking vodka. I think her partner was drinking beer, she was drinking vodka. And then another thing to look into, which I think is quite important, is 2 things. Was she someone who drank habitually on weekends? Was she someone who drank to excess quite often? And then the third thing, and none of this is scientific, it's just trying to get a sense, is this someone who, what's their threshold when they drink? If they do drink, what kind of drinks do they tend to drink? All that kind of thing. But the third aspect is, what kind of person is this person when they are drunk? And that's a question that came up with Paul Murdaugh. They said that he changed completely into a different kind of person. And so that would be one of the questions I would ask in this case is, when Karen drinks to excess, what kind of person is she? If there's any change, some people just slow down. Some people become less inhibited in some way. Some people become just different people in certain ways. And so the question then would then relate to a pattern. And so what kind of person is she when she has had quite a lot to drink, right? That would be one of the things I would want to look at. Okay, so let's continue. Reed, 43. She's 43 now. I think she was 41 at the time. She's pleaded not guilty. And as she awaits trial, a counter narrative is being pushed by attorneys and a surprising cadre of community supporters led by a blogger. And so what's quite interesting is this counter narrative has definitely gained momentum. The counter narrative has reached the media, where you've had a Dateline documentary, which is basically apology. It's her giving an interview. Shall I play another piece from that?
We had had an argument on New Year's Eve. We were away on vacation, and he became incoherently drunk. And I ended up ringing in the new year with his niece and nephew. John didn't come back to our room till after 3 a.m.
Were you guys able to hear that? So what's interesting with that short little story is that John gets apparently incoherently drunk. And so the question then arises, if he does she? Because you sometimes have people who have a relationship based on drinking, right? I think there's a movie on Netflix right now. I think it's called Drinking Buddies, right? Some people have relationships based on the fact that they enjoy drinking so much. And you kind of have two narratives now, one where she's saying he drinks a lot, which is already conceding quite a lot. I'm with someone who drinks a lot. And then you also have a narrative of that she drank quite a lot on that particular night. And so that's something you'd want to check. You'd want to check both sides of that. How much does he drink? What happens when he does drink? How much does she drink? What happens when she drinks? The other thing that's interesting is he comes home at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? In other words, this is a analogy to when he was killed. And did she call him 49 times or text him 49 times? So what I'm trying to say is, what was strange or abnormal about the night that he died? And I would say that is quite strange. Is on New Year's, she doesn't, as far as I know, I don't think she called him 20 or 49 times. On the day that he died, she called him 49 times. Now, that suggests that she's really worried about him, and maybe she was. Um, and then the question is, was she so worried about him because she knew that she had struck him, but thought that he was okay? Or had she sobered up at a certain point and somehow kind of remembered that she may have hit him? Or did she intentionally hit him and then felt bad about it later? And then those 49 messages are staging, right? Which one could it be? Okay, so let's just go back to this article. So I think just before we move on, I think what's quite important to point out here is that there's this organized public relations, this organized counter narrative that is gaining momentum. She's got a very high powered lawyer. And so you've got this organized counter narrative. And I'm going to say something now which is just my opinion. And I may eat my words later on. But my opinion is that I'm a little bit surprised that when she talks about him, there's not one single tear. You know, whether, let's say she had nothing to do with his death. Um, she gave him CPR. She was there, and but there doesn't seem to be any flicker of emotion. I think Mo Wilson's friend Caitlin Cash showed a lot more emotion just talking about her friend. You don't really see her smiling when she talks fondly of John. She doesn't. There doesn't seem to be too much emotion. Now, there could be two or three reasons for that. The one reason could be, well, you simply don't know this person very well, which is fair. The other reason could be, well, it's not like, um, it's like, well, tell me in a innocent, sweet way what you think about this person. Well, it's you being accused of his murder. I mean, who would have kind of who would not feel serious in that situation? Who would want to have a sense of humor in a situation like that? So one can, in a way, understand her not being terribly lighthearted when she's talking about it, but I'm a little bit surprised that there's not a single tear. There doesn't seem to be too much emotion. Um, and the third reason may be she's concentrating so hard on defending herself that that's not there. I suppose that's also a possibility. Um, Terry Dean says, "Thank goodness Cotton Star is here." What does Cotton Star say? Yeah, so what we are seeing is the public influence in this case. And let's just have a look at the poll. At the moment, it's still the majority of you guys saying that you would support the defense. It's quite interesting that the number right now, the number who say, I can't decide, is just slightly higher than those who say they would support the prosecution or be part of the prosecution. If you add those two together, the I can't decide and the prosecution, it's almost 50%. If you add I can't decide and the defense, and I mean, if you think about it, if you have a trial and people can't decide, well, then she's acquitted, right? It's, reasonable doubt. So if you add I can't decide with the defense, well, that's 72%. It's quite a lot. It's quite a big majority. Okay, let's continue. Thanks for your comment. I don't know if you guys know, I actually met Cotton Star during my trip through America. It was a pretty good meeting. I'm sorry I couldn't take that book, that beautiful book that you brought along. Okay, so let's continue. So they allege the counter narrative is that O'Keefe actually went inside the house owned by another Boston police officer, and there he was brutally beaten, attacked by the owner's dog, and then taken outside to die of his wounds. Now I think we're going to pause here and just deal in a little bit more detail with this particular comment. So I think you've got to just take a step back and say, what makes more sense here? What makes more sense? A scenario where a couple are both inebriated and something goes wrong, right? That's the one scenario. Or a scenario where there's a party on a Friday night and Karen Reed drops off John. And although she can't say for sure, it looks like John goes into the house, right? And what they're saying now is that he's beaten up inside this house. A dog also creates additional injuries. Then he's taken outside and dumped right in front of that house. And then he dies of his wounds, right? Now, this is my opinion of it. And I think, like the intruder narrative in the John Benet Ramsey case, I think it's one thing to say, yeah, well, there could be an alternative explanation. True, there could be. But if you entertain that alternative explanation within context, how does it stand up to the other explanation? And so this is what you've got to then think about. This individual goes into a house where there are about 15 people, in other words, 15 witnesses. Then he gets beaten up inside this house by who, I don't know. And then also, why is he beaten up? Like, what does he do? Does he spill a drink on someone? So he goes into the house and he's practically murdered in this house. Why? What did he do wrong? Why is he going to a party where he feels he's with people that he likes, only for that to happen? Is there someone at that, like, I think you need like a record who was at this party, and is there anyone with a gripe? And of course, I think everyone at the party would say, we never saw Johnny, never came into the house. And ergo, well, it's a conspiracy. Well, either he did come into the house and all 15 people decided we're going to stick together and lie about this, all 15, or he didn't go into the house. But this is the part that I find a little bit strange. Let's say he did go into the house. Let's say he was beaten up. Let's say on top of being beaten up, a dog also attacked him. Why would you then take him outside and leave him on your front lawn and then basically like you're a police officer and you know how cases are investigated and solved. By dumping a body on your own front lawn, you're kind of saying, I did it. So why on earth would you do that? And then I think the next level of the conspiracy goes, someone went and found fragments of Karen's brake lights and kind of sprinkled it over his body to implicate her. Although it kind of makes sense, I don't think that sounds terribly reasonable. And I suppose you could say that is what happened, but then the CCTV that picked up the collision with his car, doesn't it pick up someone running around there trying to pick up fragments if that's where they came from? Does that make sense? Cotton Star says, Reed's discovery antics don't ring true to me. So the other part that I feel like I've got a problem with is it seems a little bit strange that a dog would attack John. Remember, this is something like very late at night. I don't know whether the dog supposedly attacked him inside the house or outside the house. But I'll tell you why I've got a bit of a problem with it. You would imagine that if he was attacked by a person attacking him, that you would have very classic blunt force trauma. So in other words, if one person attacks another person, say with their fists, right, or with a bat or something, you would have kind of classic blunt force trauma. Whereas a dog is now bringing in a kind of different kind of wounds, like scratching wounds and sharper objects, things like that. And I can't help thinking, what is more likely, that one person beats up someone else and then the dog gets involved, or does someone, whether purposefully or not, intentionally or not, knock someone over? Does someone knock someone over and then drive over them? And if you look at the wounds in this particular image, let's see if I can find it. I think it's over here. If you look at those wounds, can you guys see that? Would you say that that is the kind of injuries you would imagine that a dog might cause? And that is, I think, to his arm. It's either to his arm or to his leg. That looks like his arm to me. Now, I would say that, if a vehicle, the chassis of the vehicle goes over part of a person, you could have a similar kind of scrapes. It's a sharpish part. It might be a bolt part of a vehicle that goes over the vehicle and then, goes over the body and then makes a little scratch like that, right? And so if you ask me, a injury from a dog would look like small little, small puncture wounds. Obviously, if he's trying to get away, if he's running away, then it would look slightly different. But those to me look like scratches more than kind of puncture wounds. Of course, if you imagine that he's inside some kind of controlled environment and that people are egging him on, I suppose you could have wounds like that, but that's starting to stretch things to like beyond credulity. And so I suppose you could argue that inside this house there was some kind of dog versus man thing going on with people cheering, but that's part of the conspiracy that no one's talking about. I suppose you could make that argument. And I mean, that would basically be the way you would assess it. Check Karen's Lexus for John's DNA. I think one possible problem is if you're driving over snow, and it's snowing quite a lot, you could have the snow sort of wipe the chassis clean. And also, if the snow melts and you're going through little areas where there's moisture, that could be the case as well. I'd be interested to know at what point the vehicle was washed after what happened. Okay, let's continue. In forums like Facebook group Justice for John O'Keefe and Karen Reed, which is 26,000 members, people dissect what they say is evidence that exonerates Reed, implicates others, and points to a massive cover-up and conspiracy by law enforcement to protect members of their ranks. A legal defense fund has so far collected more than $150,000 in donations. A billboard reading Free Karen Reed with a QR code linking to the fund was set to debut Friday near the Gillette Stadium. There's speculation, which includes analyzing photos of O'Keefe's autopsy and comparing his wounds to dog attacks, something we've just done, as well as outlining family and political connections within the small town of Canton, prompted Norfolk County District Attorney Michael Morrissey to make an almost unprecedented 5-minute video statement condemning what he characterized as the harassment and intimidation of witnesses based on false narratives and accusations. So that's from that story. I'm not going to play this. I'm not going to play it. Okay. In response, a couple of dozen protesters lined a road leading to a campaign event for Morrissey, brandishing signs including Free Karen, Where's Chloe? By the way, Chloe is the name of the rehomed dog. And framed below a framed photo of Reed and eliciting honks of support from passing cars. Cotton Star says the injuries don't have to be from the vehicle. Okay, so the part that I definitely find worth noting and kind of inconsistent is the fact that she will now say, in fact, I think she said it on Dateline. She said, I'm positive that I didn't hit him, right? But then witnesses say that she seemed to think that she did hit him, and she said, did I hit him, right? And again, you can dismiss all of that and say, well, whatever the witness says, it's part of a conspiracy, it's not true. It just becomes a bit too easy to keep doing that, to say, oh, that's part of a conspiracy. So Reed's statements, as recalled by witnesses at the scene, as well as relatives, paramedics, and the authorities. So are the paramedics also in on the conspiracy? Are relatives also in on the conspiracy? You might say yes. A paramedic said that Reed repeatedly told her, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. In a preview for an upcoming Dateline episode, Reed said she'd framed it as a question. Could I have hit him? Now, this is the part that I think is huge. She's saying, after everything has passed, after the adrenaline has passed, she's now got a statement to make. And on Dateline, she says that she'd said, could I have hit him? And the fact that she's acknowledging that's a possibility, I think means it's a possibility. Does that make sense? The fact that she is saying that at the time she thought it was possible that she could have hit him. Well, it is possible that she could have hit him. Think about it. It's late at night. She's doing a 3-point turn. Later on that same night, she virtually crashes into his vehicle. She's inebriated, and what's the other thing? Um, the conditions are kind of treacherous. There's a storm, visibility is not terribly good, and the traction underneath is not terribly good either. And so the problem I've got is where she says, "Could I have hit him?" And then she says something slightly different on on Nightline. She says, "Did I hit him?" Right? And there may be more truth in that than you realize. Is that she didn't know whether she'd hit him. Um, Let me try and put that in a different way. She may also have hit him or hit, yeah, let's say she hit him, not meaning she purposefully hit him, but she hit him as she left, but assumed that he'd um, bumped the vehicle with the palm of his hand, almost, like when if you're a cowboy and you want your horse to go off into the field, you might slap its rump to say, "Off you go." Maybe if they'd had an argument in the vehicle and the vehicle had gone off, maybe he'd banged the side of it either in pique to say, "I'm really pissed off that you're not coming with me to this party," or he may have banged it um, to say, "You'll be fine. I'm going to have fun. You go home. You'll be fine." Or that bang was him actually being struck. And because she wasn't totally conscious, totally aware of what was going, she may have been somewhat in a fuzzy way aware that he was struck, right? But didn't realize it was so serious until she'd sobered up. In other words, this is all coming on to dolus. Is there intent? Tom says John weighed 270 pounds, took a size 13. The thing that I think is also worth noting is he had multiple skull fractures. Now, you don't get that from a light bump. And so that's definitely something also worth noting. He doesn't have slight light injuries. And it seems like he wasn't just struck. If you take the taillight version, it seems like he wasn't just struck once and then the car drove away. It seems like he may have been struck and driven over and perhaps driven over again, right? There could also have been an argument inside the vehicle where there could also have been an argument that preceded everything. Okay, anyway, let's continue. Her father, William, and this is quite big, Jennifer Coffendorfer, ex-FBI, said that this was a major error made by the defense. Her father told Boston's 25 News, that's in this conversation. I'll just post a link to that. But he basically said that she said to him, "Dad, I think I struck something." Reed said, "What do you mean?" And this was in the hospital. She says, "I remember backing up and hitting something, but I can't say what it was." And at this point, she's frantic. Now, this is her own father. Is he also part of the conspiracy? Let me say that again. According to her father, she says, "I remember backing up and hitting something, but I can't say what it was." Now, that's also a possibility, is that maybe they argued and maybe she backed up and maybe she hit him. Maybe she knew that she'd hit something, but she was so fucked, if I can use that term. She was so drunk that she just didn't really register that it could have been him. And a couple of hours later, then she kind of perhaps considered that possibility? Can you see how you can dismiss all that conspiracy stuff and you can say, yeah, maybe there was a conspiracy, but this statement from her father, that doesn't quite work. Is her father a cop and is he part of the conspiracy? I doubt it. But I think what's important here is this: backing up. And the only way that the only thing you could really damage on a vehicle backing up and hitting something is really your taillight. And that's exactly what was damaged. And so I can't help wondering, is it pure coincidence, pure fluke, that later that morning she then apparently damages her taillight all over again? Or was that the beginning of a different kind of cover up? You hear about cover up, cover up, cover up from in terms of the crime happening, by a policeman and police covering up, but couldn't you have covering up of this crime? Anyway, let's deal with this part, the after party. Reed and O'Keefe had been dating for a couple of years at the time of his death. After briefly seeing each other in their 20s, Reed said they reconnected on Facebook. By then, O'Keefe had become the guardian of his sister's two children, after she and their father both died 8 years earlier. What do you think is the significance of that? That he's the guardian of two children. What do you think is the significance of that? Well, I would say it just leads to higher levels of stress. So they were girlfriend and boyfriend, they hook up again, and now she's kind of playing the role of a mother figure to not even his kids, to someone else's kids. Doesn't that become a source of opprobrium? And that is exactly what she says. Is she says, even in that interview, she says, on New Year's, I ended up with his niece and nephew, and I wasn't very happy about that. She says so. And so that could be a source of arguing. Reed often stayed at O'Keefe's house and had planned to stay the night of January 28 after they went bar hopping. And what is interesting is she leaves him and then goes to his house. That's the other part that I think is quite interesting. If she intended to kill him, why would she go to his house afterwards? Why wouldn't she go to her own house? And I do think if she had intended to murder him and she'd then gone to her own home, that would have been potentially a sign of consciousness of guilt. Do you agree with that? But the fact that she then goes to his house afterwards, I think is interesting. Authorities said in a narrative document obtained by HuffPost that according to witnesses and surveillance footage, Reed and O'Keefe went to two bars that night where Reed consumed up to 9 drinks. Now, if you want to argue about how much she had to drink, if you want to say, you know what, I don't think she actually had that much to drink, then I think you've got to look at the fact that she goes to they go to 2 bars, and all of this eventually happens at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I think you can ask the question, how drunk can a person get by going to 2 different bars and then you go home at 1 o'clock in the morning, as opposed to if you go to one bar and you go home at, say, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. And so the question is, this was kind of in the festive season. It was January. You still kind of got a bit of the New Year's and Christmas cheer going on. We're about to head into that period now. People are having quite a lot of parties. It's cold, and people are kind of having fun. And you've kind of got that sort of holiday spirit. And maybe she felt, I really don't want to go to another party after going to these 2 bars. I've had enough. But then he did want to. And so maybe his appetite for drinking and partying was greater than hers. And he maybe expected her to kind of look after the kids and be the babysitter. And she didn't like that. A forensic, here it is, a forensic toxicologist said that Reed's blood alcohol level were between um, uh, 0.7 and, sorry, zero point 0.07 and zero point 0.08. And then they estimated that, so that's when they tested it. And they estimated that a blood alcohol hours earlier would have been at that level. And there's quite a big difference between 13% and 29%. But even if it was this lower amount, it's almost approaching twice the illegal limit, right? It's almost twice the legal limit. And I think what the prosecution are going to need to do is have a forensic toxicologist that's credible. And I think if the defense want to win their case, they need toxicologists that can say, I don't agree with that, and the jury prefer his assessment, I guess. Okay, let's have a look at the votes. 43% of you are with the defense. 27% are with the prosecution case, or would support the prosecution case. At the waterfall, they socialized with Jennifer and Matthew McCabe. And as the bar was closing down, Jennifer McCabe invited the couple to join them at the house of her sister, Nicole Albert, and her husband. So they are socializing with a couple, and they don't leave because they just decided let's go somewhere else. They leave because the bar is closing down. Isn't that also indicative that someone is drinking quite a lot? You don't leave um, because you've decided I've had enough. You leave because the bar is closing. And so they are invited to join basically another party. And this is actually where the incident happens. It happens outside the house. Brian Albert, a longtime Boston police officer, and the other people there as well. So you must bear in mind, if this is a conspiracy, they'd invited Karen to go into the house as well. Were they going to murder her as well? And it is a woman who invites this couple to basically her sister's home, right? It's a woman who invites them to her sister's home, and her husband Brian Albert is a friend of John O'Keefe, or you could say that John O'Keefe really admired this person. And then Karen's story is that she wasn't sure whether the invitation extended to her. So in other words, it's a situation like, hey guys, let's go to a party over here, and there are like 15 people and it's really late at night. And she's saying, yeah, I'm not sure whether they invited me specifically. Can you go and find out? In other words, can you go, this is her story, can you go into the house and just find out whether I'm also invited, right? And then he goes into the house, but then, according to her, but then doesn't come out, and then she just leaves. If you think about it, that story doesn't make a terrible amount of sense, because first of all, if you were quite drunk, would you really care if you were specifically invited? Also, if you're going to a party really late at night, do you really want a personal invitation? And so the impression I get is that she simply didn't want to go to this party. And you kind of get almost a status quo thing going on. He is a cop, and he's going to a party that is with like a cop friend and their friends, and she's not a cop. And do you guys know what she does for a living? She's a finance professor, and let me just make sure. She's a finance lecturer at Bentley University in Massachusetts. She's also an equity analyst at Fidelity. That's kind of her background. It's kind of a little bit different to a cop. It's a little bit, I would say, what could one call it? White collar. I'm not sure. Someone says here, I would care. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. You would want to know if you were invited. Christina says it sounds like there was an issue with Karen and his friends, at least on her end. Care Bear says, why was I timed out? Well, that's the answer. Okay. Do you guys follow what I'm saying? That it seems a little far-fetched that someone would invite them to another party, and then you'd say, I don't know if I was invited, can you make sure of that? Especially if you're quite drunk. But then maybe if you're quite drunk, you already getting a little bit irrational, or maybe you just want to go home. When Reed and O'Keefe arrived, they didn't respond to Jennifer McCabe's text directing them to the park, directing them to park in the driveway, and instead stayed in the car on the street with the engine running. Okay, by the way, if people are mentioning a particular channel, please just block them, because this isn't an this is not a advertisement for a particular channel, especially if it's an apologia channel. I mean, this is the first time we're covering this. So if you from this point onwards, if someone mentions another channel in passing, just kick them right off. Okay. Because obviously that's going on in this case, that there's this whole organized thing to support this counter narrative. So this is the part, again, that's also quite interesting, is Reed and O'Keefe arrive at the house, and then two things happen. The one thing is they don't get out the car, and that suggests that there's some sort of argument taking place. The argument might be, can we just go for half an hour? I'm tired. Or it might be, maybe it's true. Maybe she's doesn't really like the people, or feels that they don't really like her, and is kind of trying to talk him out of it. Maybe it's around the question of, well, if I drop you off, how are you going to get home? Please don't come home like tomorrow, or whatever it is. Or maybe the argument is him saying, please come in with me. Like, I want you here with me. And she's saying, no, I'm tired. I'm not going. Right. And then maybe he's upset. He's upset that she doesn't want to go in with him. And maybe that's what the argument's about. But it does seem that there was an argument in the car. And if you think about it, this is potentially the last time that he's alive. And it looks like there's an argument just before he dies, right? Now, of course, you could take the other narrative and say how can I put it? You can have the other narrative where you say he gets out the car and he's very happy, and he's like, okay, I'll find out whether they want you at the party. And he goes in, and then they beat him up. Maybe he says, hey, my wife wants to know, or sorry, my girlfriend wants to know whether you guys actually want you at this party. And someone says, no, we don't want her here. And then he says, well, I don't really like you saying that. And that starts an argument. I suppose that's possible. But the bottom line is, even even in her own version of events, the last time she sees him, they kind of have a disagreement, where she's not very happy. She's kind of irritated that she doesn't know whether she's invited. Let's see if I can find that clip. Don't know if it's this one.
But Reed says she had no reason to harm her boyfriend.
I would call him the patron saint of Canton. He was just very selfless, frugal, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that didn't care for John.
The couple first dated in
So there's a video just of her saying that she kind of likes him, that he's a nice guy. I think this might be the video I'm looking for.
That you said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
I said, I hit him. It was preceded by a did and proceeded by a question mark. What I thought could have happened was that did I incapacitate him unwitting?
So again, I've got to say it bothers me a little bit that she's quite aggressive in this interview. Maybe again, you can say anyone would be if they're accused of murder and they didn't actually do something. But it reminds me a little bit of the Brian Koberger look, that kind of thing, which is, the thing that I'm wondering is, did she lose her cool? Did she get angry? And maybe she changed her mind afterwards, but maybe at the time she was extremely angry about something, and maybe she had every right to be. But one kind of gets a sense of someone who feels quite strongly about things, certainly from her demeanor, and yet you don't see a single tear, right? I'm still trying to find that. I don't know if I've got it, where she says, I don't think I'm going to be able to find it. It's basically where she says what happened, that he went in, and let's see if I can find it.
To be there.
But at the bar, Reed says there was an invitation to continue hanging out at Albert's home.
I said, can we make sure we're welcome here? Nobody except.
So if you get what she's saying there, she's saying they've just been invited, but I guess they were invited by a friend of the sister. And now she's saying, can you make sure if we welcome? And I guess that might be a valid thing to say, maybe we welcome, maybe we're not. But the fact that someone says park in the driveway seems to me that they very welcome. But of course, we don't know who this person is that well. Thanks a lot, Alf. Wow, you've been a member for 7 months. I always enjoy your comments on my channel. Thanks a lot. I'm just saying, under a lot of the videos, I enjoy what you have to say. Thanks a lot. Have there been any super chats? I don't think so. I would be upset too. How many times has she been asked the same questions? I know someone who has an older model Mercedes that went backward fast. I want to quickly say something that I've kind of had on my heart for a little while regarding this case, and that is, isn't it possible that Casey Anthony's child, could have been run over by mistake as well? Because do you remember there was some point where Kaylee said, I think I ran over a squirrel, or I think someone, I think, said, there's a smell of a dead animal, or there's a smell in your car. And I think her first thing was, well, I think I ran over a rabbit or something like that. I couldn't help thinking about that as another possible way that something could have happened to Kaylee. I don't think it's very likely, but I certainly think it's a possibility given some of the many statements that Casey Anthony said. By the way, a video's just come out. Someone said something, I think it's from News Nation, that from Banfield, that there's new information that could totally devastate the Casey Anthony defense. So I'll be keen to look into that. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. In other words, one of Casey Anthony's explanations for the smell of a cadaver in her car was that she said, "Well, I hit something. I hit an animal," and could what happened to Kaylee be something like this? Just a thought. Yeah, that is right. Okay, so let's go back to this. I'm also like in the middle of studying the Madeleine McCann case and people saying that there's the smell of meat and this and that and so I just find that quite interesting, the intertextuality. Anyway, let's stay on this. Okay. At one point, witnesses said the car moved forward from its position by the driveway and stopped again near the spot where O'Keefe was later found. Eventually, at around 12:45, the car drove off without either of the two going into the house. Now, this is quite interesting, is that Jennifer McCabe texts them and says, park in the driveway. And then what happens is some kind of incident happens out on the road instead of coming into the driveway. And what this kind of suggests is that someone didn't want to be there. You kind of get the idea that John wanted to go to the party, and the person who was driving the car didn't want to go to the party. Um, and maybe you had a situation where John gets out the vehicle and he's actually trying to urge Karen to change her mind when Karen basically decides, I'm leaving, right? I'm not going to listen to you. I don't want to go to this party. And perhaps that's when something happens. Or she feels that maybe she felt that John had already gone into the house and had just said, well, look, do whatever you want. I'm going to the party. And then she assumed that he was gone. Thanks a lot, Alf. She assumed, I hope I didn't guilt you into that super chat. She assumed um, that John had gone off, and then perhaps she drove a little angry. Perhaps she reversed quite strongly, and then drove off. Um, the part that I think makes this so much more complicated is whatever the emotions, whatever the dynamics. If you were quite drunk then that would kind of smudge your perception to quite a large extent. And that then does affect to some extent the dolus aspect. Timmy, can I put you down? Now, once again, you can kind of have a situation where um, sorry, Timmy, my green screen just fell off my chair onto my dog. Don't worry, it's quite a light screen, but anyway. See, now I'm aware that happened. That was an accident that happened, and I'm pausing to notice it. My dog's just shaking himself and he seems to be fine. But I mean, I didn't do that on purpose, but I paused and I noted what had happened. The thing that I find interesting is that we have CCTV of her hitting another vehicle and then just driving off hours later. And the question here is, did she hit John deliberately and then do something else to him deliberately and then drive off? And wasn't perhaps as conscious of what she was doing because she was quite drunk and she was uninhibited. She was not quite herself. Could that have been what happened here? That's the one narrative. Thanks a lot, Sharon. Kerry says, I'll have to back up later. Love your covering this. Thanks a lot, Kerry. Okay, let's continue. Do you guys agree that it's not a straightforward case one way or the other? Even if you say, let's just bring it on to me for a moment. Even if you say this is a she's the perpetrator here and whatever, it's not a very clear case because I don't think she kills him in that narrative. Even if you accept that narrative, I don't think she kills him with her car. I think the thing that ultimately kills him is the cold. And so it's not dolus directus. It seems to be dolus eventualis, which is you should have known, and this is one potential argument, is that you should have known in a situation like that that you'd first of all hit someone or hit something. The only person out there was John. You should have known, you should have checked, and then you should have taken care of him. Now, the counter argument to that is you could say, I wouldn't have known because I was drunk. I should have checked, but there was a storm out, and I just kind of heard a thud. That could be the counter to that, right? But in the same way as with the Rust incident, I believe Alec Baldwin had a duty of care. I mean, one thing that's different between Alec Baldwin, and her is Alec Baldwin shoots Helena Hutchins, walks straight out the building, smokes a cigarette, and observes events. Is on his phone, whereas she screams, she performs CPR, she seems distressed in her actions regarding what has happened. And although that seems mitigating, it's hard to say whether the car hitting the other car that same night of all nights isn't staging as well. And it's also hard to say whether the distressing thing and inviting friends over isn't a kind of staging as well, to say, watch me feel bad and appear shocked by everything that's happening here. And are the 49 calls or texts staging? Is the whole attempt to blame the police a kind of narrative staging as well, right? I'm just asking. To me, the critical question is, if you are on the prosecution side, what is the motive? What's the motive to kill John O'Keefe? And I can understand someone doing something in the fit of the moment. Thanks a lot, Deborah. And then, because they're compromised, maybe they're emotionally compromised, but they're also inebriated. I can imagine something like that. But I really don't see this as a case where she said, I'm going to kill you, because she doesn't actually even kill him, even if she did strike him with the car. What ultimately killed him, according to the autopsy, seems to be the cold. And how they know that is he had bruising to the pancreas. And you could only have bruising to the pancreas if he was still alive, and then he had hypothermia. That's not to excuse the serious multiple fractures that he also has. I think the critical question is, would he or could he have gotten those fractures from being rear-ended by a vehicle? So one way you could get that is the vehicle hits you and then you hit into the vehicle, but you'd imagine that would dent the vehicle. Another way is if the vehicle hits you hard enough, you hit the ground quite hard and then you fracture your skull that way. And then a third way is if you're driven over while lying on the ground, that could also cause a skull fracture. And so I think what makes this case quite complicated is what caused those injuries. And if you are having difficulty between a dog causing them and the undercarriage of a car, you're already in kind of some trouble, right? And I suppose one way to deal with this is find photographs, documentation, find examples where of dogs causing these sorts of injuries, right? And either you're going to find injuries that match or injuries that don't match, and then that's going to be your case. Or try and find examples of injuries caused by cars going over people. What sort of injuries do those cause? And I would imagine skull fractures would feature quite highly under that. Okay, let's continue. McCabe said that Reed told her the last thing she remembered that night was being at a bar with O'Keefe, according to the authorities. So this is also quite interesting, and this is where I have a little bit of a problem with the defense case. And again, you could say every time one of these problems come up, you could say, well, it's conspiracy. You know, everyone is in on this conspiracy. You know, all the relatives and everyone is saying things to implicate. So it's to implicate Reed, and at the same time exonerate the folks in the house, and specifically Albert. What's his name? Um, Brian Albert. Now, something that I found interesting was, I don't know anything about the legacy of the Boston PD. You know, I don't know anything about that. But what I found interesting was there was this big parade. There were all of these motorcycles lined up, and there was a big deal was made of John O'Keefe's funeral by the Boston police. Now, if the Boston police had murdered one of their own and they were covering it up, I don't think they would have like this big thing honoring him. I just don't see that. But I find it interesting that you have that contradiction. Sassy Pan says, I'm very grateful for this and I understand it's a lot of work, and especially with this case. That's an interesting point. Okay, let's continue. So this is the part that's quite interesting. She says Reed told her that the last thing she remembered was being at a bar with O'Keefe, right? And then she seemed to change her story when she was on Dateline. She would say, okay, no, I actually remember arriving at the house and I actually saw O'Keefe approach the door. And then I looked up from my phone and I no longer remember seeing him. That's quite a specific memory. That is quite a big change from, whoa, I don't remember anything. I don't remember hitting anything. Oh, I remember him walking to the door. And I remember looking up from my phone. And then I didn't see him anymore. And then this is the part that's so interesting. She says, I was irritated that he didn't respond to my texts. Now, the way that I think you could possibly prove this case, if you're the prosecution, is you could say, did she send those texts saying, where are you? Did she send them from outside the house? Where did she send those texts from? If they can geolocate those texts, and those texts are from all of those texts are from his home, then I would find that very interesting. And also I'd find it very interesting if it is not at 5 a.m. but at say 1 a.m. In other words, that she seems to be aware that something serious has gone on from the word go, but why is she aware at his house? On the other hand, if she is texting from the outside of the house, if it can be geolocated to the outside of the house, I think that gives her a very, very strong case. Do you guys agree? Let's read some of your comments. Lisa says, I've spent many nights at bars in Boston. I'm the designated driver because I don't get wasted. That's also what's quite weird here is she's the designated driver and she seems to be the most wasted person in the story. So that I think is a crucial question, and one you're probably gonna want to jot down in your notebook, right? The other crucial question is, what is her intention? What was her intention? Um, and equally, if there's a motive for the police, what would their intention be? And then which motive makes the most sense? Okay, let's continue. A chaotic scene unfolded hours later. McCabe said she received a distraught phone call from Reed at around 4:53 a.m. And what I find interesting with that time is maybe that was enough time for her to kind of sober up. And to me, perhaps the best defense that she may have is that she was intoxicated beyond a certain point, that she wasn't able to think rationally. And so I think if she is convicted of anything, she may be given a fair amount of leniency because of the amounts of alcohol that were involved. I can't say for sure whether, I'm still trying to figure this case out myself, but the fact that she gives him CPR, the fact that she lifts up her shirt and tries to warm his body, the fact that she seems to act with so much urgency suggests to me that either she has a change of heart or she is sincere. It's possible, I suppose, that she's performing. It's difficult to say that for sure. The other thing that I've got a little bit of a problem with is that she says she saw O'Keefe immediately in the snow, which, when you look at this, for example, and this is from
This
security video, sorry, CCTV video. Do you really think that someone who's been lying in the snow is going to appear, you're going to be able to see them very easily 4 hours later? Look at the way the snow is falling. Now, the other thing that I find just strange is when I first saw this footage, I wrongly assumed that it was taken from the sort of the watering hole where they were drinking. And it actually turns out this was taken from their garage. And what that tells me is surely she knows there's a Ring camera there. Surely she knows that it's going to be captured on the camera, this incident. And also, why the heck doesn't she drive with her car to the scene? Because she ends up going to the scene in somebody else's car. So what's that all about? So if you say she's panicking and it's an emergency and she needs to do things very, very quickly because someone's life's at stake, and she performs CPR, what's this business about changing vehicles? Also, as I say, why is she able? She, of the three people, is the only one that knows exactly where he's lying. She sees him whereas the others don't. Well, Chelsea says it doesn't look like there's a lot of snow from that vehicle. Well, look, this vehicle is covered in snow, and there was a snowstorm that night, which is why he died of hypothermia. You can see the snow is actually falling. And Chelsea will probably say, well, by Canadian standards, that's not much of a storm, but I think it is. And if you just add up all of this flurry, let's just go back slightly. If you add up all of this flurry, if you add hours and hours to that, someone's going to be covered in snow, aren't they? Chelsea says not enough to cover a body. You mean like over 4 hours? Over 4 hours. I don't know. I feel differently about it. But anyway, the fact is, the other people didn't see him lying there, and she did. That's just something to bring up. So another woman, Kerry Roberts, said Reed had called her at about 5 a.m. Saying she was worried because Keefe had not come home, saying, John's dead. Kerry, I wonder if he's dead. It's snowing. He got hit by a plow. So she's calling quite a few people, and she seems to be quite clear on what may have happened to him. And she's also implying that he got hit by a plow. She's also coming up with scenarios for what may have happened. Now, again, it's on the one hand you can think this seems like guilty knowledge. On the other hand, you could say maybe this is the kind of person who has got quite a quick mind and is just speaking her mind, right? Oh, I must thank you so much, Bruni. Appreciate that. Let me just highlight your comment. Thanks so much. Thanks. That's also very interesting. The ring camera of her arriving home after dropping off John was deleted. Thanks, Gojo. Okay, Roberts met them at McCabe's house. So this is Kerry Roberts. Kerry Roberts met them at Jennifer McCabe's house. And because Reed was hysterical, McCabe said she drove her back to O'Keefe's home, where she had been staying, while Roberts followed. So it's quite interesting. They drive. They don't drive straight to Brian Albert's house. They're driving to other places. Now, you would imagine that would be the first place that she would drive to. If it was you, wouldn't you just drive to? That was where you dropped him off. That's where you saw him go into the house. Why wouldn't you go there? Why is Reed hysterical when she apparently just doesn't have any answer to where he is? It's a little Patsy Ramsey-ish, isn't it? And this is where they say Reed said, could I have hit him or did I hit him? So she said here to someone else, he got hit by a plow. Now she's saying, could I have hit him? And she mentions that the right taillight of her SUV was cracked. Now, how did she know the right taillight of her SUV was cracked? Because she doesn't get out in her own driveway. How did she know? And is that the reason why she doesn't drive the rest of the way? When she got home, did she look at the vehicle? This is quite an interesting point. When she got home from dropping John off, did she look at her vehicle? And is that why the Ring doorbell has been deleted? Because you can imagine if she arrived home and then got out and then looked at the back of the vehicle and saw that there was evidence of what had happened, then you can almost imagine that there would be a need for a cover-up. There would be a need for another explanation for why there's a damage to the taillight. Does that make sense? McCabe checked it when they arrived at O'Keefe's house and confirmed that it was cracked and that pieces of it seemed to be missing. That's also quite interesting. Roberts then drove the woman to the Alberts house with Reed sitting in the back seat. I also find that quite interesting is Reed is the one who wants to find her boyfriend. So why is she not, number one, driving? Why is she recruiting all these other people, and why are they going in someone else's vehicle? At this point, it was windy and snowing heavily. Well, there you have your answer, Chelsea. It was snowing heavily, and so that's why the other women were surprised when Reed immediately spotted O'Keefe lying in the snow. How did you know he was there? Now, I will be the first person to agree that these problems or inconsistencies or contradictions or issues, each one on their own, isn't really something that you would really worry about, right? But if you jot each one of them down, right? If you write down, for example, that she immediately sees him in the snow, even though nobody else does, and she's sitting in the back seat. Is there anything strange with that? Also, why, if she's so urgent and intentional, why is she not driving there in her own car? And why has she recruited these other people? Reed screamed, jumped out of the car, ran to where Keefe was lying on his back, covered in about 6 inches of snow. Right, so he's covered in 6 inches of snow, and she's still able to see him. And laid on top of him in an attempt to warm him and began CPR. McCabe said that Reed yelled at her to Google, how long do you have to be left outside to die from hypothermia? Now, what is interesting with that is that Google search is now being held up to say someone in the house knew that John was outside and they were waiting for him to die. And that's not the correct context at all. Do you guys see that? I also think it's strange that Reed would say to Google that in the middle of trying to save someone's life. Would you do that? In the middle of trying to, if you think you're saving someone's life, would you? I don't know. It's a little bit of a difficult one. I suppose if you've been performing CPR for 5 or 10 minutes, you might say, well, I don't know if this person's alive. I can't feel their pulse. Their skin's very cold. Let's, I guess, do some research. Wouldn't the thing be that you would do, first of all, is say, call 911? Wouldn't the first thing that you would do even before you began CPR is call 911? Kimchi says, how do you know that Jen is telling the truth? Well, we don't. We don't know. I don't know if there's a Ring doorbell camera nearby. I doubt it. I don't know if there's a car dash cam. I don't know. But that's also why I say you must make notes, because then you must also say, is everybody lying every single step of the way? And then something that you could check independently is you could say, was there a heavy snowstorm that night? Right? That's something you could check independently. Now, weather can be a little tricky. So you might have an official weather report saying that there's no snow. And I mean, a good example of this is the John Benet Ramsey case. You could have official weather report saying there's no snow, there's trace snow, and then there is snow. You could also have weather saying, predicting whatever, and then the conditions on the ground are whatever they are. But there's another way to deal with this. Is you could look at social media where people have posted pictures from that time, 29 January. Was there a lot of snow? Also, what do the weather reports say? And then I think for me, as someone who, I'm not in Boston, that Ring doorbell footage to me shows that there was likely to be quite a lot of snow. That's what I see when I look at it. You might say, Chelsea might say, well, you being biased. Well, it's not as though there's not any snow falling in front of the camera, and it's also not as though there's zero snow on the ground. The entire driveway is covered in snow in some of the vehicles. So I don't think you can make the argument that snow isn't going to be a factor here. Meredith says Karen is innocent. Okay. That's a possible scenario. I hadn't actually thought of that. Maybe he walked to the door, and while she was looking at her phone, um, he said something like, "Can Karen come in?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, bring her in." And then he went back to call her, and she thought, cheapers, he's not coming back, and sort of drove slightly angry. And maybe if she drove over him, she thought that she was driving over a clump of snow, right? That is a possibility. Chelsea says, wasn't that video around 5 a.m. and they found him shortly after? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, let's continue. Timmy, it's just so hot having you on my lap. It's really hot. So I don't know about you. When I first saw the whole thing, how long do you have to be left outside to die from hypothermia? I thought, jeepers, that's a red flag. But if you don't know the context, then it's easy to get the wrong impression. And I think if you see that and then you say, no, 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 it's all part of a conspiracy, I'm not going to believe anything. Just be careful that you're not thinking critically enough about this. So one of the things I was saying to my patrons on Patreon was I was saying a lot of gears in your mind should be turning as we go through this story. You need to be thinking about the legalities, things like intent. You need to be looking at things like scientific information, like the autopsy information. You need to be looking at things like um, what did actually kill John in the end? Was it the multiple skull fractures or was it the cold? If you took away the cold, would he still be alive? Um, I think that's quite an interesting question. Um, okay. I do think that is a very big question, probably the biggest question. What is the motive here? I do think the way to kind of answer that is if you say, well, what was the motive for murder? Question mark, and then there's like crickets. I think a possible answer to that is maybe she didn't intend to kill him, but maybe she did intend to hurt him. And then the question may be, had she ever hurt him before? Maybe she was irritated with him and, how can I put it, meant to drive away, making a point, I'm upset, and didn't know that she'd hit him. Um, and part of that didn't knowing was being drunk. On the other hand, maybe she intended to hit him and did hit him, but didn't intend to kill him. Just simply meant to, again, hurt him, but didn't think that he would get that hurt, and then realized that he did get hurt. And then there's the third possibility is that she did mean to kill him. but within the context of being drunk. And how many people do get killed by people who are drunk, either drunk drivers, people who are drunk and they've got a firearm, people who are drunk and they get it into their ideas that someone's cheating on them. A lot of people die because someone gets drunk. They become paranoid, they become angry, and so at the time that you under at the time that you're intoxicated, you might be fully intentional, and then when you come off that, maybe you're not so much. And that's what makes this case kind of complicated, is there are so many layers to it. But there certainly isn't a classic situation here that she was killing him because she wanted custody, or she was killing him because she wanted to cash in an insurance policy, or she was killing him because she wanted the house. I don't really get that sense at all. You don't have like the Dulles directus you have with the Kate and Armstrong case. But like I say, the flip side is you don't necessarily need to have intent to kill someone, for example, in the Alec Baldwin case. But the fact that you did kill that person, certainly in that case, raises all sorts of questions such as, should you have known better? Were you taking precautions? And even after you harmed that person, did you try and help them? Right? When you knew that person was harmed, did you go to any effort to help them? And Alec Baldwin didn't. Other people on the scene did. In terms of, and so a question that arises here is, did she know? Because she said this to her father. I think I struck someone, but the question is, did you think you struck them at the time you struck them, or did you think you struck them when you arrived back home and you looked at your rear light? At what point did you realize, I think I struck someone? And I think that's the critical question, is when she said to her father, I think I may have hit, what did she say to her father? She said, I remember backing up and hitting something. And so what does that mean? Does it mean when I backed up and hit something, I knew at that time, or I remembered it later on? That seems to suggest to me that I backed up and hit something I remember, because I remember it happening when it happened. Doesn't it mean that? She's charged with vehicular manslaughter and second-degree murder. So it is murder, but it's murder without premeditation. So it's not with determination, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's go to where we were. I think it's over here. And this is the part that I think is perhaps the most important part, which is this is now when they are sober and the normal situation, what was going on in their relationship. In other words, what was the nature of their relationship? And I think you can compare that to what is the nature of John's relationship with Brian Albert. Is it Albert or Alberts? Alberts. Timmy, you're too hot. I'm going to put you down, okay? And I mean, this was the thing that really shone through in the Caitlin Armstrong case. I don't think you would need DNA. I don't think you would need half the evidence that they had. I mean, the prosecutor still said, I've never seen this much evidence in my life in 20, 30 years of doing his job. it was abundantly clear what was going on in terms of the dynamics of that relationship. And so that, in a way, is proving your case. And so the question here is, are the relationship dynamics going to prove your case or disprove your case? And it applies on both sides. What was Brian Alberts's friendship like with John? What was Brian's relationship like with Karen? And go through all of those dynamics. Which is the central dynamic we need to pay attention to? Was there a love triangle here, right? And so what happens is you look at this relationship and you can see it's kind of uneven and wonky in all sorts of ways. They've got children, but they're not their children. It's not his children, it's not her children. When they have arguments, it's about how she's raising the children. She feels, a little bit like Letitia Stork, she's feeling like she's expected to look after the children while he runs around, and she doesn't like that, understandably. But also, they're not his children either. In a way, they're probably more his children than her children. So, kind of what's going on here? And so, can you see? It says here a toxic relationship. Although the people who saw the couple at the bar on January 28th said they seemed to be getting along, O'Keefe's 14-year-old niece and 10-year-old nephew told them that their uncle and Reed frequently argued. And where you're going to get a better sense of the dynamic between this couple than from these kids. And so are these kids also part of the conspiracy? No, seriously, there's some kind of police conspiracy. Are these kids, have they also been bought over into the whole police department? Are they also on the payroll? A 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. The 14-year-old's, it's a 14-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy. Shelly Babe says, this is a joke. Reed is being framed. So are the kids also framing her? Are the kids trying to frame basically their mother? Another intertextual story to this is Stephen Smith. Did somebody kill him intentionally? Is that story absolutely the same as this one? Well, no one came back to check whether he was okay, right? So if you didn't know that you hit somebody, would you go back? Well, you wouldn't. If you did know you hit somebody and there's evidence on your car that your car is damaged, what are you supposed to do? Sally says, and I think this is quite a good comment, that there is doubt. So I'm going to give you just my position. I would be on the prosecution side, but I would be the first person to say, I think they're going to have a really tough time proving their case. And there's a lot of doubt in this case. So my position would be, I know the majority of you say I would be with the defense. I would be with the prosecution. I see far too many problems in terms of inconsistent statements. And I'm just someone who tends not to believe in conspiracies. So I think you've got to be careful if you take I actually wanted to read some of the comments below the videos. If you're someone who says, oh, is there a conspiracy? I believe it. That's the perfectly wrong way to go about this, starting to think critically about this case. In fact, it's the opposite of thinking critically. You might say, you know what, I think the whole government of my country is a conspiracy. Yeah, but that's not dealing with the legal merits of this case. The legal merits of this case is what happened in this case, what are the specifics, not I think that the cops are whatever corrupt, and so I'm on that one side. Well, that's not dealing with the merits of this case, because you could do the same in the Caitlin Armstrong case. You could say the police in that case were inept and corrupt, but then did they kill Mo Wilson? Because that was the essentially the defense case, and the defense like to use the common sense of distrust of institutions to explain away details that may be not very clear. But that's not arguing the merits of the case. That's simply saying, because I feel strongly about that, I'm going to feel strongly about that. And so I believe that. That's not knowing the case one way or the other. In the O.J. Simpson case, the jury were upset about the Rodney King thing, and people said the verdict in the Rodney King case was payback. Sorry, the verdict in the O.J. Simpson case was payback for what happened to Rodney King. That's exactly the wrong way uh, to what's the word um, judge and think about the merits of a case. To say I'm not very happy about that, and I believe that. But the fact is that is how people think, and that's how a lot of people are. And that is exactly what the defense in this case are preying on, in my opinion, is the widespread distrust of authority, which is going on in America, the widespread unhappiness, I guess, with law enforcement among certain groups. And then instead of saying, is Karen guilty of something or not, this is an opportunity to belong to a group who doesn't like, in other words, by politicizing this case, you then have a group that belong to a particular political group, and then that's the story. That's not the story of the case, though. But I do think there's a ripe field for people to respond to that kind of politicizing of the case. There's a ripe thing for that, and that's exactly what's happened. And there's a big group that is gaining momentum. But the question is, are you thinking critically about it? As Terry says, people do love a good corruption theory. The nice thing with a conspiracy is everything suddenly becomes so simple, so quick, and so easy. There are also all sorts of questions. Let's think about it. Let's try and work it out. No, it's quite simple. There's a conspiracy here. There it is. I don't want to be bothered by the details. I don't need to know any of the ins and outs. It's just bogging me down. It's a conspiracy, and I feel better knowing that. But that doesn't mean that that's the truth. Anyway, let's go on to this. So, if they frequently argued, did they argue that night when Reed was, according to allegedly, particularly drunk? She'd had 9 drinks, and then something happened within those circumstances. And I think that's one scenario. The other scenario is, I suppose you could say, John was an argumentative individual. Maybe you could say Karen was as well, but he was an argumentative individual, and he went into another party, and that's where arguing took place, blah, blah, blah. You could interpret this that way as well. But this is the part that I think is really interesting, is that they say he wanted to break up with her. And you may remember that in the Jodi Arias case, if you say, what was Jodi Arias's motive? Well, Travis wanted to break up with her, and she was simply very possessive and very unwilling to accept that, and that she kind of wanted to get him back. And so in a situation where if you believe that O'Keefe wanted to break up with her and they go out together, and then he wants to go somewhere, but she doesn't. And she's kind of saying, I don't know if they invited me. And he's saying, well, I'm pretty sure they invited me and I'm going. And she's saying, well, I don't know if they invited me. And it's within the scenario that he wants to break up with her. You can imagine her feeling hurt, angry, insecure, and all those things. And then the question is, if he wanted to break up with her, why? That's the first question. And the other one is, why did she want to be in a relationship with him? And also, how much did she want to be in a relationship with him? And, if you look at what she said early on, that he was this model of society, and that even though he had kids, she was in this whole thing. It seems like she did want to be with him. Anyway, investigators said that according to text messages, O'Keefe said he wanted to end their relationship, which he described as toxic. According to authorities, Reed told O'Keefe she hated him in voicemails she left in calls placed after she left the Alberts home. That's quite a strong statement. Now, is that true? If there are recordings, if there are voicemails that are going to be released in court where she's screaming or saying something like, I hate you, how does that change anything? Because her words were that she was irritated. She said, I was irritated that he left me. He went into the house and left me, which is in a way a concession. I wasn't too happy with him that night, right? But irritated is a much lower level than I hate you. So I do think you're a little bit naive if you say someone ends up dead, and on that same night, the prime suspect says, I hate you, and is one of the last persons to see that person alive. I think you're quite naive if you say, you know what, I don't think that that's relevant whatsoever. I think just those two things together, saying, I hate you, within minutes of, maybe it's hours, but I would guess saying I hate you within minutes of that person possibly losing their life, and maybe he was bleeding and about to die. He was alive, but sort of suffering. Maybe she said I hate you to him and drove into him, or tried to drive into him and didn't know if she had or not, didn't know if she'd hit a clump of snow or not. But the bottom line is saying I hate you, not just on the day that somebody dies, but within minutes, and you allegedly the last person to see that person alive, that's quite a big hurdle. And that would definitely be something that would give a jury pause. If you made opening statements to a jury and you ended off with this, I think it would be quite a strong argument. If you made closing argument and you ended off with that, and maybe you even played the voicemail, that would be quite a compelling argument. The interesting thing is also, Reed doesn't deny that their relationship was strained, right? So I don't think you can say that the kids are in on some conspiracy. The kids are telling the truth because Reed is saying the same thing. But I do actually agree with her when she says she's got no motive to kill him. I don't think I can't see a motive to kill him. I don't see that. There might be one, I just don't see it. And that, I think, is the biggest weakness of the prosecution's case. And that's also why I think if she did kill him, it was not necessarily intentional. Um, it's in a way similar, perhaps, to the Alec Baldwin case, where whatever she did, perhaps she should have known better, something like that. That she should have exercised more care and concern. Um, because there does seem to be a sense that shouldn't she have known that he was out in the snow? If she thought she'd struck something and she busted her taillight when she arrived home, shouldn't she have gone back? And if she couldn't make contact, shouldn't she have gone back then, not at 5 o'clock in the morning? I also think the counter to no motive to kill him is that she may not have had a motive to kill him, but she may have had the intention, like a passing, like an emotional um, explosion. You know, one minute you feel very strongly and the next you don't. So there may have been not a motive so much, but a fit of rage, if that's the word, which was brought on by alcohol. And that's why I say it's important to find out what kind of person she was when she was drunk. Was she typically a mean drunk? Was she a paranoid drunk? Was she a flirty drunk? Was she a dopey drunk? What kind of drunk was she? Or was she someone who just never got drunk? That's quite a good point from Terry. The problem I have with this is all a mistake, it was an accident, is those multiple skull fractures look like someone knew what they did and must have heard or felt those impacts. And of course, there is another possibility is that somebody else struck um, John. It's another possibility, like another vehicle struck him. Maybe he walked to the wrong house or walked across the road or something. How likely is that? When she had a busted toe light, I don't think it's very, very likely. Okay. Meanwhile, this is the defense case. They say that other people inside the house that night did have a motive to kill him. Colin Albert, Brian Albert's 18-year-old nephew, whose father is a Canton selectman, had previous run-ins with O'Keefe. So that is quite a good argument, is that someone inside the house may have had a motive. Um, what were those run-ins? When was the last time there was a run-in? What happened? That's why I say the dynamics on both sides are quite important. How toxic was this relationship? How toxic was that relationship? Reed and his supporters allege that Colin and Brian Albert, a trained MMA fighter, fought O'Keefe and when things went too far, framed his girlfriend for murder. The part that I find a bit odd here is, are you telling me that 13 people collaborated on this crime? 13, like men and women at a party? And a dog. And the other thing is that apparently John liked Brian. John looked up to Brian. Authorities have said that Colin Albert left his uncle's house before O'Keefe even arrived. So, although this is quite a strong argument, Colin Albert's a suspect, blah, 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 he's got a motive, but he left the house before O'Keefe even arrived. Well, I know what you're going to say. No, it's a conspiracy. He didn't leave the house before he arrived. That's what they're saying. And so you could take everything that supports the prosecution's case, every statement, and say conspiracy. And then everything that supports the defense case, well, no, I believe that. That's not a conspiracy. They insist that this and many other claims by Reed supporters are completely baseless. The Alberts are not suspects, but rather innocent witnesses. 11 people in all told authorities they did not see O'Keefe enter the home. And I do think an interesting, one way to get around this scientifically is you could say, well, is there any evidence of John O'Keefe in that house? And, if he's been beaten up, if he's been by two people, if he's been really badly injured by two people and a dog, you would imagine there'd be an orgy of DNA evidence lying all over the place. That there would be hair, clothing fibers, on the shoes of John O'Keefe, you'd have perhaps carpet fibers, but you'd have clothing fibers. There'd be so much evidence because not just one blow, it's like a lot of punching and so on going on. And that there would be some evidence of his DNA, touch DNA, hair, clothing fibers, whatever, would be in the house. And then the question is, did they find any of that in the house? I don't know. You must remember that we actually haven't had the court case yet, so that is yet to happen. I've got a bit of a problem with that, where you say 11 people didn't see him enter the home. Bear in mind, someone's invited them to the house. Someone saw that they parked not in the driveway, but whatever, and texted to say park over there. And noticed that the car was running for quite a while. So they noticed that. Surely, if they noticed that, they would have noticed them coming into the house. I do think, in a way, this case is a bit like the Ramsey case. If you can prove that he never went into the house, then just that. If you can prove that he never went into the house, then Karen becomes basically automatically the prime suspect. In the same way, with the Ramsey case, if you can prove that there were no footprints in the snow, right? If you can prove it, or even no footprints in the frost, those icicles you get on walkways sometimes when it's very, very cold, then there couldn't have been an intruder, and then that makes your case a lot easier. Someone says, can you see the door from the living room and the kitchen? Well, here is a picture of the house. Let's do it like that. And there, the door's like right in front. I mean, it's pretty clear. Let's see if I can get a better picture of the house. Brian Albert's house. Albert's house. John O'Keefe. Yeah, I can't quite pick up. Anyway, that's the best I can do in terms of the house. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the dog. Does this look like wounds from a dog? Does that look like wounds from a dog? And I do think if you look at how deep those wounds are, could that have been made by the undercarriage of a car, by a car going over the arm, or did a dog make those wounds? They all seem to be almost like in a line. So now we're going to deal with the dog. In a recent court hearing, Reed's attorney Alan Jackson, a prominent Los Angeles lawyer who previously represented Kevin Spacey, displayed a poster-sized autopsy photo of O'Keefe's injured right arm, insisting that several distinct parallel lacerations on his biceps and forearms could not have been caused by blunt force trauma, as prosecutors claimed. Now, I agree with that. I definitely agree that that's not a single impact. That's not like a car hits you and then you fall down. I think that is like something going over. And I really don't think that a dog would be capable of making those sort of wounds. Don't ask me why. I don't think they would be as long, I guess. I don't think they'd be as parallel, and they'd be more ragged if it was from a dog, I would imagine. Jackson said the wounds represented claw and bite marks from an animal. I must say, I find that particular comment idiotic. Dogs don't claw and leave those sort of injuries. We're not dealing with a bear here. I'm just saying that's my personal opinion. Someone might say, oh, I know dogs that rip open rabbits with their paws. I've got a dog and I've never been injured by its paws, but I suppose some people might believe that. But to say that those are claw marks to me is idiotic. That's just my opinion. And then he refers to a German Shepherd. I've actually torn a German Shepherd off my dog, and he certainly never ever had claw marks on him or bite marks on him. But maybe that's just my experience. He says the dog would likely attack if its owner was fighting. Now, the part that I also find a bit odd here is if this is his arm, that's quite a strange place to be making those sorts of marks. You'd think the marks should be on the buttocks or on the lower legs. The arm is quite high up on the body. You would think that those sort of wounds would be made on hands and on the wrist, not almost on the shoulder. What you also notice here that's is kind of a, I don't know if that's a bruise or if that's a sign of lividity, but that's also quite interesting, that over there. Anyway, let's go back to Jackson said the deeply bruised backs of O'Keefe's hands are defensive wounds from a fight he contends occurred inside the house. Again, those deep bruises could be from the tire going over the hand, that sort of thing. Or if he's holding a glass and the vehicle hits him with his hand in front of his body. Anyway, it's interesting that he says, I don't care what their medical examiner called it. And so what you have here is the defense narrative saying, competing with, I guess, their narrative. And I think it is material what both medical examiners are going to say. I do think it's interesting that the medical examiner said blunt force trauma and hypothermia, because I don't think it makes much sense if you mean to kill someone that you leave them outside in the snow. And that is why I don't really think this is murder. If you meant to murder someone, then wouldn't you make sure that they were dead? And I don't think he was dead. Anybody who's seen any sort of fight, so I don't know. I personally just don't agree with this comment. He's saying anyone who's seen a street fight knows about that. Well, that doesn't to me look like a street fight, if you ask me. Autopsy images have been widely shared on social media, with people posting photos for comparison of documented dog bite injuries, speculating about previous incidents with a German Shepherd. Reed's defense attorneys claimed Chloe was rehomed 4 months after O'Keefe's death, the same month the defense began investigating O'Keefe's injuries. Jackson demanded samples from the autopsy and a DNA sample from the dog so they could conduct tests of their own. And so that's the other thing is, surely if a dog has bitten John O'Keefe, you're going to find dog DNA and saliva and all sorts of evidence from a dog on his body. It should be quite easy to prove. According to Reed's defense attorneys, in a request for additional cell phone records for Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe, the cell phone records show that McCabe searched how long to die in the cold at 2:27 a.m. And I think a lot of people have gone crazy over this particular aspect. And of course, the context is apparently that Reed yelled at her to make the search while she was trying to attempt to resuscitate O'Keefe. Meanwhile, people assume that she made the call, so she made the search inside the house at that time, and apparently that time is not accurate. The defense claims that the data shows that McCabe deleted the search history and call records from her phone. Prosecutor Adam Lally argued that cell phone extraction data was unreliable and pointing to other data extracted from O'Keefe's phone. So I don't really know what the situation is there. I don't know whether they got, I guess, unreliable data. If you're going to just say, just like that, that the time is unreliable, well, then that's not going to be enough. You're going to need to show it and prove it and have a cell phone expert say that. The other thing is, maybe Reed is going to deny saying that she said that, but I think there are two witnesses. There were two people present, two women. And if they both say the same thing, how much weight is that going to carry? I don't know. I do agree with that it's usually reliable. So the thing is, it is usually reliable. I do agree with that. Okay. Reed's defense attorneys claim that health and location data from O'Keefe's iPhone shows him going up and down stairs, presumably inside Albert's home. So this is also a problem for the prosecution. Why is he going up and down stairs? That does make it seem like he's in the house. Shortly after midnight, bolstering their theory that he was attacked in the basement. But prosecutors said in a motion filed in May that same data shows O'Keefe taking hundreds of steps hours after he was pronounced dead. And I guess that is quite a good argument. Why is his iPhone showing him taking steps hours after he was pronounced dead? And I guess one thing with that is you would ask, did someone remove his iPhone from the scene and then put it back at the scene I would love to have an expert explain that anomaly because it does seem quite strange. One thing that I do know is with Strava, if you, well, with certain sporting apps, if you're driving in a vehicle, it sometimes registers that as taking steps, like the vibration of a car. And I think one thing that's possible here is that either Brian Albert took the phone into the house and did something with it, or Karen took the phone home with her, got rid of certain things, and then returned it to the scene, or it's just kind of a Bermuda Triangle of weirdness. It makes this case definitely quite complicated. Conspiracy theorists do not accept that there were only patches of blood found at the scene when O'Keefe had a 2-inch laceration on the back of his head, a picture of which has been shared alongside other autopsy photos. Since most head wounds cause profuse bleeding, many of Reed's supporters are convinced he bled out in Albert's basement. My response to that is, well, if it is very cold and if he was outside, then that could account for a certain amount of um, the blood being constricted. In other words, if you chill or freeze somebody, the blood's not going to be as mobile, have the motility that it would normally have. Yeah, so that's exactly what I would say. Kimchi, I really like kimchi, but I must say I feel like we've disagreed on quite a few things, but I agree with you on that. Uh, I also agree with you, but I'm trying to find a way to explain this anomaly. I guess it's also possible that he was struck and kind of wandered around. Um, he's kind of got concussion. He's sort of wandering around. I'm not saying like he's walking kilometers or miles, but that he may have stumbled around a little bit, and maybe that had some kind of impact. I don't know. I mean, it could have taken hours for him to die, and maybe he crawled around for a while. The medical examiner has noted that O'Keefe's clothing was saturated with blood and that he suffered bleeding of the brain from multiple skull fractures. And so that I do think kind of makes sense to me. Planted evidence. O'Keefe was wearing only one shoe, a black Nike sneaker. When he was found, Canton police officers didn't immediately see the other shoe. It wasn't found until later that day by state troopers. Now, what this could indicate is the force with which he was struck, if he was struck by a vehicle. That's something I didn't really know, I didn't really think about until I covered the Stephen Smith case, was that when people are struck very forcefully, they fly right out of their shoes. And it's one reason why they thought Stephen Smith probably wasn't struck by a vehicle, but the latest investigation seems to confirm that he was. I'm just saying what they say. Because of the time lapse, Reed supporters became convinced that the shoe and pieces of the taillight were planted to incriminate her. You also have this police narrative in the um, Stephen Avery case, and I'd be very interested. For those of you who blame the police in this case, I'd be very interested to know whether you blame the police in the Stephen Avery case. I'd be very surprised if there was a difference there. I would imagine you would say the police framed Stephen Avery there, and the police here framed Karen Reed. I wrote 2 books on the Stephen Avery case where I strongly make the case that he and his nephew murdered Teresa Holbach. And there was a big thing going on. There was the lawsuit where I think he was going to be refunded $34 million. That was definitely in the offing, but the other side of that is he hated the police and he wanted to celebrate this windfall that was about to happen, and so on and so on. Anyway, so I wrote books about that. But that's another case where the police are the villains of the story. Because of the time lapse read supporters, okay, I've read that. At least 35 pieces of taillight were collected at the scene, none of which were spotted by local police who initially responded. Authorities have noted that investigators were hampered in their search by the extremely heavy snowfall that day, which marked the seventh biggest snowstorm in Boston's recorded history. And I think that is a very important fact, is that part of what killed John O'Keefe was this incredible storm. You could also argue that where people normally would have perhaps gone out and checked on him, because it was so cold and the conditions so severe, they didn't. You could also argue that he may have struggled to get to the door more than he otherwise would have. And you can also potentially explain that maybe you didn't see those pieces of taillight because the snow was so deep, and if you weren't looking for them, would you necessarily see them? If it took quite a long time to find the shoe, isn't that also why it took that long length of time to find the taillight? But I think what you can see is this is quite a complicated case with lots of moving parts, and both sides have got their work cut out for them to make their case. And although I personally think the prosecution have got a fairly reasonable case, the fact that Karen has hired these big hitting defense attorneys, I think it's, in terms of the legal battle, I think this is going to be quite a trial to cover. So I am looking forward to covering it. I think it's supposed to start in March next year. Is that right? Okay. I think we most of the way through this article. What does justice look like for Karen Reid? Says here, her supporters' campaign is gaining momentum, and her high-powered attorney's aggressive tactics are fueling the conspiracy frenzy. No trial date has been set. As far as I know, a trial date has been set for March 2024. Is that the end of this article? I think so. Okay, so we are almost at the 3 hour mark. I just want to thank my mods for being here for that long. I want to thank you guys for your super chats. Do you guys want me to? Has Stephanie left? What does Stephanie say? Going out for dinner. Okay, well, I hope you have a great dinner. Really good seeing you, Stephanie. And I'm sorry I didn't see you when I was in Long Island. Terry says, would the corruption theory be that the after party was a setup? So let's have a look at the poll. What's happened to it? The poll seems to have disappeared. Shall we put up another poll? Do you think Karen is guilty or innocent? Let's have a look. So I'm trying to get rid of the 20 or 30% you said, I just can't decide. Well, you're going to have to make a call now. Obviously, it's just your opinion, right? Let's see what you guys say. Do you think Karen is guilty or innocent? So far, 71% say innocent, it's around about a third to two-thirds. That seems to be where we are. Okay. Let's read some of your comments. Erica says, I'm too confused to answer. Wow, still, okay. Liz says, innocent, you just need to read court documents from both sides. Songbird says guilty. Melissa says, I need to hear all the evidence available before I can take sides. Rookie says, this has been great. Well, that's good to hear. Now, just in terms of, I'm sure it feels like some of you here who've made up your minds, and you're not gonna change from that position. The important thing when you're hearing this case for the first time is actually to keep an open mind, and to do that for as long as possible, to remain curious, to gather information. So even when you see a bit of information, for example, like someone Googled, how long does it take to die of the cold? You've got to be careful going, I now cross the line and I decide absolutely that this is the way things are, right? Because there's another narrative, and if you say every time there's another narrative but this, and you just sort of block it out, you just sort of, it's almost like goes immediately into the outbox, well, then you're not thinking critically about it. And the same applies to the other side. If you say, I don't believe that she even hit that car, or you say, in other words, everything is informed by bias. So in other words, the proper way to think about this case is you weigh both sides constantly. So you say, okay, so this is what the prosecution is saying. What did the defense say about that? This is what the prosecution is saying. What did the defense say about that? This is what the prosecution is saying. What did the defense say about that? Then you say, the prosecution say this. What did the defense say? And you're evaluating constantly both those arguments, but not from the position where you're a soldier guarding a fortress, from the position where you say, on the accumulation, on the aggregate of all of this information, what makes the most sense, right? And I don't think it's fair to turn it into a rhetorical question where you say, well, what is her motive? I think part of that question is, well, could she have a motive in terms of, if someone's drunk, could they do something that they didn't mean to do? Is she someone who can get angry? Is she someone who can get triggered? Is she someone who can get irritated? Is she in a is she in a relationship that is triggering? And the answer is, well, this guy wants to leave her, so it clearly is. Clearly, she is in a state of heightened anxiety and stress, right? and all the conditions are there when this happens. It's late at night. She's under the influence, whether you want to believe that she was very drunk or not very drunk. She's nevertheless under the influence. I don't think anyone would say that she's completely sober. He is also. And common? What is the most common perpetrator um, in these types of scenarios? Well, it's the most intimate partner, the person closest to this person. And so the defense want to make the case that it's not the intimate partner, it's someone whose party they were being invited to randomly at the last moment. And I think that's quite important to reiterate, is that if you take the defense case, then you're saying randomly a group of people that didn't even know that they would end up with um, are involved in some kind of elaborate conspiracy. Then what is more likely? Something that was escalating every single day, day by day, month by month, right? And there are all these other stories, or that there were these random things and a random dog, right? And I guess it depends on how integrated you think about certain things and how what your biases are. And I do think even if the state presents a strong case, it just takes one or two people on the jury to say, you know what, I don't trust the cops, and then that's your outcome. So I think it's going to be they've got an uphill battle proving their case. I do think if they've got a lot of um, cell phone data text showing just how toxic the relationship is, that might be enough. Who knows? I think what you're missing here is if you were drunk when you did something. When you're sober, it's a slightly different world. Your emotional self is settled. Your perceptions are different. I think it's totally different. The that aspect, and yeah. So that's really my response to that. Mel says my mind is as open as a huge barn door. Erica says, I went against my instincts to reserve an opinion until I knew more, but answered after watching your first video to test myself. So, yeah, so this case will be heard, I think, in March next year. I do intend to cover it. I'm also thinking of this actually went quite well. I actually thought I'd be coughing a lot more. Um, I may actually be covering the Letitia Store case. I wrote a book about it, but I never actually uh, covered the case because I was in America at the time and I was attending the Laurie Vallow trial. By the way, he has actually a ticket, one of the tickets to one of the court days, and so I might actually do that starting quite soon. I'll see how it goes. I mean, I think it's about 2 weeks worth, but I might actually do that during December. Um, I don't know. I just started watching some of the coverage, started reading some of the things, started um, looking at body cam, and I just got quite interested in the case, and I thought there were quite a few things that when I wrote the book just before the trial. I thought, I'm pretty sure Gannon was shot, but nobody heard anything. And that then got partially answered in the sense that he was shot and a bullet was found in a pillow. And I think I did say in my book that could he have been shot and the pillow used as a sound muffler. And so, it was interesting writing that book before trial. It's going to be interesting just seeing, for me, what what did happen ultimately and what was proven. And you also, one of the biggest mysteries is who was Letitia. I think that sort of gets answered in a lot of the body cam. You just see how she manipulates, how often she does it. You get a kind of a sense of who she is, because that was one thing that there was so little material on her that, but that kind of gets answered to some extent through all of the body cam. I must say the fact that she says I saw him walk all the way to the door, and as he got to the door, I looked down. I personally find that like a red flag goes up, because at the crucial moment where you're supposed to be able to prove that he went into the house, you can't. And so I just find that it's almost in your own imagination that part gets filled in. I personally don't like that about her story. Yeah, that's a good point. I think a jury's gonna maybe think the same thing. So if you can if you can provide a alternative story, then that's a problem for the prosecution. And I do think if a dog was involved, you're going to find DNA all over the place, and I just don't think that that is the case. Just don't think that is the case. I mean, when I first heard about the story, I thought, what was it? A neighbor's dog who kind of went nuts with someone lying outside. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think the trial date has been set, but there are all sorts of, I think, internal investigations going on. The FBI, I think, are involved now, so I'm not quite sure. Thanks, Wendy. Erin says, shouldn't we trust our intuition? No, you should. You should. In terms of true crime, in a case like this, you should think scientifically and you should think critically. And I think there are quite a few people that are thinking along the lines of their own bias, which is, do I like the police? No. Well, then I think she's innocent, kind of thing. There are times when you can and should use intuition, um, but intuition isn't. You can't use that in a court of law. You can't kind of say, "I've got a feeling this person's guilty," or "I've got a feeling this person's innocent." It just doesn't belong there. I mean, you can say it and you'll get objection overruled, and you'll have like egg on your face. Um, yeah. How long have I been studying this case? Probably less than a week. Probably less than a week. One of the early mistakes I made in this case was I thought that she pulled out of the bar parking lot in that footage that you see where she kind of sideswipes another vehicle. I thought that she pulled out of the bar parking lot, but the fact that she pulled out of her own home parking lot and hit his vehicle or seemed to hit his vehicle, that to me is just bizarre. Haven't you sobered up by then? And also, wouldn't you just get out your car and see what had happened by then? It just seems to me that's where I actually start to wonder, was this an innocent accident, or is this actually something far worse? And someone's actually trying to cover up something that they know or ought to have known that they did. Because it just seems very strange, this idea that you might have twice fractured your the rear of your vehicle. And of course, the only way to really answer that is to get to know Karen Reed a lot better. Um, and if she's got so much support, is it because people know her and know that she's a good person, or is it good PR, or what is actually going on? Paula, welcome. Thanks a lot. Chelsea says thanks for the excellent chat. I just want to see what the response was to anyway, that's over 3 hours. I'm gonna hit the hay. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here. Thanks, guys. It's been almost 2 months since my last live. I'm gonna probably try and do a couple more before the end of the month, maybe even quite a few more. So mods, don't disappear. But guys, thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. Let's just have a look one more time at the stats. Just have a final look. 65%. Well, so it's actually gone down a little bit. So it's basically about a third think that she's guilty, 2/3 say innocent. That's quite interesting. Cool. Okay, well, that is it from me. Guys, I hope you have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.